Let's bring the Rav up and Rav. Hold on, let me make sure. Hold on. Okay, so the Rav is unmuted. Rabbi, how are you?
Toda Lael, Baruch Hashamayim. I'm doing very well.
Amen, amen, amen. So just let me ask you this: did you have any? I mean, I didn't really say I was going to ask you this, but did you have any jet lag coming back from?
Not really, because I'm currently living in Europe, in Belgium. So the time difference is only 1 hour.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Okay, that's fair enough. And then let me ask you this: it's just an outside question. How did you recover from the food? Because you had all this spicy food in Nigeria.
Very good question. Wow, that was a challenge the entire month. Eating foods that I was not used to for a long time. I mean, when I lived in the Dominican Republic, a lot of the foods in Nigeria are similar, but without the hot spice. And I was not used to eating that every single day. And I had stomach issues the whole month. But I don't regret the experience. I would do it again.
Wow, wow. So for people who are, who may not know about all your work and everything that you've been working on for the last, decade and beyond that, maybe you could give us a little bit about your background and how you became a Dayan. Not super detailed, but just a broad overview of just how we got here. Go as long as you need. We got all night. So
okay. So for those that don't know me, my name is Yehonatan Elazar-DeMota. I was born in Miami to Caribbean Sephardic parents. We are Spanish speakers at home and English outside of the house. My parents migrated from Dominican Republic in 1970s. I was educated in the United States, in the state of Florida, Miami, primarily. I began my academic studies in aerospace engineering in 1999 on an academic scholarship at University of Miami. That degree I changed my major about 6 times in a period of 7 years and finally obtained a BA in liberal studies in 2007. In 2003, I started to study rabbinics under Chacham Yosef Ben Arosh of blessed memory at Magen Sephardic Congregation in North Miami Beach. And with him, he took me as his apprentice in the way Sephardic Jews used to train rabbis in the old days before the system of yeshivot influenced Sephardic Jewry as it is today. And we went everywhere. We went to do weddings, burials, memorials, and we studied every single day, Halakha, Shulchan Aruch, primarily, and Gemara, morning and evening. And then in 2007, I met Chacham Mordechai Levi de Lopez, who's from Brazil, and we studied classical Sephardic methodology of Talmud. And we did that for many years. In fact, he gave me a homework assignment that took me 14 years to complete, after which he gave me Semicha as Dayan. And that was signed by Chacham Jacob de Levi de Oliveira, who is in Brazil at this moment. And let's see what else. I'm missing a lot of things because I don't like to talk about myself. It's easier for other people to do that. In 2009, I moved to the Dominican Republic and I founded the Nidhei Israel, the Sephardic congregation. And I was there for 4 years. After 4 years of living there, I decided to go back to the United States to continue my studies. And that's when I embarked on the journey of anthropology and religious studies under tutelage of Dr. Professor Tudor Parfit, Anna Bidegain, and also Professor Albert Waku, who I learned anthropological methods from. And 2016, I graduated with a Master's of Arts in Anthropology, Religious Studies at FIU, Florida International University. And in the summer between moving from United States to Europe, I went to Israel for 2 months and was trained as a mohel. I was certified as a mohel by Chacham Yoel Nisim Dayan who's in Bet Shemesh. I knew I was skipping something. I also studied the laws of Shahita in 2008, 2009. I was trained and certified as a shochet. And I trained 4 shohatim in the Dominican Republic so that they will be independent and not have the issues that we're having before I arrived to the country. Let's see what else. In 2021, I was awarded PhD in international law after defending my dissertation successfully, after which I moved to Portugal and then embarked on as a visiting professor at Universidade Lusofonia do Porto. I was there for just 1 semester. It was online in the middle of the pandemic, so that was kind of strange, teaching university courses online. And then after that, a year later, that's when I received the Dayanut Semicha. And months later, I came back to Europe after a time in about 14 months in the United States. Came back to Europe, this time with a postdoc at the University of Antwerp in the history department. I'm between 2 disciplines, urban history and political history, where I am focusing on the issue of Portuguese Jews in the 18th century and halakha and international law, private international law. I am currently writing 2 books. One of them I sent the manuscript about 3 weeks ago with University of Amsterdam Press. That book is going to be called Black Jews and Their Slaves. I know a lot of people are waiting for that. And the second book should be finished by the end of this year and published by early 2024. That's a book that I'm co-writing with Professor Dr. Michael Broyd at Emory University at the Law and Religion Department. And that book is on the interaction between Jewish law and international law, past, present, and future. So that's, in a nutshell, some of the highlights of my studies.
So, first of all, that's extremely impressive, and as a person who's a new rabbi, it's a lot. It's a lot of things you put out there that are very inspirational, and it should be inspirational for everyone listening.
I want to say as well that I never wanted or envisioned myself being a rabbi. Chacham Ben Arosh, a blessed memory. I tell people the story. He tricked me because I just wanted to be a knowledgeable Jew, to be able to raise a kasher Jewish family. That's what I wanted.
Amen.
And he took me under his wing and trained me in everything that he knew that he could in the years that he had. And one day he just surprised me. He said to me, Yehonatan, you have to learn how to do the Keriyat Torah because it is shameful for a rabbi not to be able to read. And I said, what? Rabbi? It's like, this is what he did. So he trained me without telling me what he was doing. Years later, after he passed away, it dawned on me that what he was doing was he was training me as if I were his son, because he only had daughters. He didn't have boys. So I was his son. So everything I do, I always remember him because I keep his memory alive.
Amen. He should live forever and have the highest Eli and Shemaim. Let me ask you this. So tell us a little bit about the court that you work with, the international circuit of rabbis and how you guys function.
Great. Good question. So in 2014, after a number of trips going back and forth between Israel and the Dominican Republic, I came up with the idea of organizing a Bet Din, an international Bet Din, which would empower and through education the disenfranchised and marginalized Jews in Latin America. That was how we started. And at that time, there were 7 rabbis on the board. To this day, there are 5. 2 of them have left for personal reasons. And so currently, we have Dayan Jacob de Oliveira, who's in Brazil. We have also Rabbi Hananiah Cohen, who lives in Israel and Gush Etzion in the north with the border of Lebanon. Rabbi Dayan Eliezer Tabor, who lives in Eli in Samaria, and Rabbi Haim Ovadia, who many of you may know of him. He has a Sephardic U and Torah Ve'ahava, and myself. And we have other liaisons who we consult and who work with us as well, such as Rabbi Moshe Ariel Abel, or Abel, who lives in the UK. And with the passing of time, we realized, after speaking to one of my colleagues, Eliezer Papo, who lives in Jerusalem, who's also a professor at Ben Gurion University, he told me, why do you limit yourself to only Sephardic Jews? This vision that you have of the Obadiah Alliance should be something that's international, should be global. And it dawned on me at that time, I was like, he has a point. He has a point. And that's when I, under my direction, the Obadiah Alliance started to open the borders to other communities that are not Sephardic. And the first project, I would say, was the Igbo Israelites of Nigeria and other regions of West Africa, which I will talk about in a little bit. And yes, it was very controversial, but it was something that had to be said, because I realized that there has been an enormous amount of research that we cannot deny, number one. Number two, there have been also historical writings, rabbinic writings in their context between Igbos and Jewish communities going as far back as the 17th century. Also, there have been contemporary rulings on the Igbos and many Haskamot. When we met in Israel this past April, I met a gentleman, an Igbo gentleman who's been living in Israel for 40 years. He's been fighting with the state of Israel to get the Igbos recognized. And he had a book, a very thick binder, full of documents, everything written in Hebrew on the customs of Igbos and history. He had way more than what I could ever imagine. Wow. And on top of that, he showed me all the various rabbinic letters, rabbis from the USA, from Canada, from Israel, from Italy, agreeing on all the information that he had. Even chief rabbis accepted all this information. The issue is with the state of Israel. And so when I met him, he wanted to share all these things with me. And this is why I'm saying that it was bound to happen. Someone needed to open their mouth and say it. And Obadiah Alliance, we did that. After, I've been studying for about 8 years the anthropology and history of the Igbos. And after that arduous investigation, I then decided to write this teshubah. And I shared it with my colleagues after finishing. And to my, I was a bit nervous when I shared it with them, because I wasn't sure how they would react to the notion of that we have Israelite brothers in Africa who are Black, and we have been disconnected from them for a long time. And to my surprise, two of the rabbis immediately, unanimously said, "This is excellent work. Hashem bless you for what you have done." And then we got permission to publish it, and it was published last year in January. After doing that, there was a huge boom on social media, on YouTube, even on Nigerian TV and other media and avenues of information. And a lot of people started writing me every day. My email was full from Igbos all over the world saying, "Rabbi, what do I need to do now? What can I do? What does this mean? Can I make Aliyah? Am I recognized in the local Jewish community?" There were so many questions going around. And so, yeah, that's my answer to your
Yeah, no, it's great. We're going in a perfect direction. So let me ask this, for the people who may not know how, I mean, everyone's familiar with secular court, right? You know, people pay tickets, people have different issues,
right.
but how does a rabbinical court go about, in this particular area, of verifying someone's Judaism? How does that work? How do you guys come to that?
Very good question. There are a number of Batei Din, Jewish tribunals around the world that do this. They usually issue what in Hebrew we call Shetar Berur Yahadut, which is a document which clarifies your Jewish status or identity. And so what most rabbis are trained to do is to look for documentation. They look for sometimes pictures or writings in prayer books or pictures of tombstones. They also listen to oral stories and testimonies of witnesses about the Jewishness of a particular individual. So this is how most rabbis who handle these cases are trained. We go a step further, because the rabbis at Obadiah Alliance have studies in anthropology and history and secular studies. What that means is that we're able to do what halakha requires in the Talmud, Tractate Chulin, page 12a. It says, wherever you can ascertain the facts, you must do so. And wherever you cannot, we incline to the majority. And what that means is, before we can even make a ruling, or before we can go to the halakha and make a decision, we have to first do the science. What the science means is anthropology. We have to put on our thinking cap and go into the field and investigate genealogy, stories, documents, everything you can think of. And also looking at if it's regarding a particular group of people, then that enters into another category of law, or another premise in the law, which is hazakah, by the law of majority. And so when you have a group of people doing something, this is not one individual, but a group of people who are doing the same exact thing within a particular context. So in anthropology, you do what's called the ethnography. The ethnography is you go into the fields, you immerse yourself, you include your experience in what you are observing, and then you step away, you step back. And when you step back, at the second stage, you do what's called ethnology, which is interpreting what all of that means. And so a rabbi who does this type of work has to do this type of investigation first. That's what the rabbis are doing in the Talmud in Tractate Avodah Zarah. How did these Sanhedrin judges know how to rule what is considered illicit worship? They were anthropologists. They knew what the nations were doing and how they worshiped their deities and the type of rituals and practices that the nations practice within the Near Eastern context. And then they were able to rule for or against or create a fence to protect the ignorant people from falling into Avodah Zarah by way of ignorance. So the way the court works is, traditionally, you have a place where you meet with all the judges, the rabbis included, to answer questions. There are different things you do. In halakha, you can do what's called berur din, or berur halakha, to explain a law. If there's a question about a law that's kind of gray, it's not black and white, and these questions are given to Dayanim. The Dayanim study the case, and then they issue a ruling in written form. So it's called responsum in the Latin term or English. In halakha, in Hebrew, we call that teshubah or shut, she'elot u'teshubot. Judges can also rule in cases of monetary or civil matters, including divorce, marriages, and business. To this day, many Batei Din do not deal with the civil matters because of the lack of political religious jurisdiction. There's only one country that really has that, which is Morocco today. The Dayanim there rule according to Jewish law in all matters because they have been given that authority. Not even in Israel, where you have a large number of Jews, is this the case. You have different legal systems that most of the time do not jive with each other. And that's what creates the debate and the disputes that we have on a daily basis in that type of court. Because of the pandemic, I'm going to add something new. Because of the pandemic, many civil courts, secular courts, started to utilize the internet as a way to hear cases, and through Zoom. And many Jewish tribunals assume the same exact methodology. And so what today many Batei Din will do is the rabbis will meet by way of video call like we're doing now, to talk about issues, and then they will discuss according to the law and by way of consensus. So you need an odd number. If you have 5 judges, you need a majority of 5, which will be at least 3. So in that case, when you have a majority, then that matter is established, as we learn from the Torah, that any matter is established by 3. And also we incline to the majority, as we learn in the Talmud. So that's how Jewish courts work today. Sometimes, in some cases, they function, they have civil authority, and in other cases, they don't. And so we see cases, for example, that have to do with the Aguna crisis, the divorce, and all of that. In some places, like in New York, where you have a large amount of Jews, a Bet Din may stipulate on the marriage contract to tell those who are involved to delegate their authority in the case of divorce to the lawyers and judges that are on that Bet Din. And many of those rabbis will be practicing lawyers or even judges in secular court. And what that means is they're able then to make the settlement out of court and then present it at the register at the civil court. So you have Jewish law then being interpreted into the local law of the land. And that's what we need more of today in the diaspora. That's what's lacking in order to fix this problem. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, you're on fire. This is very good. Okay, so with that being said, and now, for people just joining, the Rav just went through the structure of the international based in that all the questions that we have, just hold off. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. You could put the questions in now. Feel free to put the questions in now, and we'll address them later on. So for people who just joined, the Rav just went through he gave us the outline on his background. This whole conversation, this whole Zoom is recorded, so it'll be on YouTube. It's on live on YouTube now. It's going to be on all the different social media. We're going to cut up different parts, the whole thing. But the Rav just went through. He gave us a brief overview of his very extensive, impressive background, and then we went into the International Rabbinical Court that he's the head of. And we just now touched on the point of how that rabbinical court works and how rabbinical courts work in general. And so before we go into exactly the Igbo dynamic and what we came out of that, I want people to understand what is the difference per se. We have Rabbi Chaim Kanetsky in blessed memory, who's no longer with us, but gave the ruling in 2014. We have other rabbis like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who gave a ruling on the Ethiopian Jews. Mm-hmm. So, for as much as you could share with us, how did they see the issue, and then how do you guys? This is the same, or is there different perspectives?
Okay, very very good question. So I will have to make a disclaimer first before even I address the question for everyone to know that, because most people don't know how, in terms of jurisdiction, how does a Jewish court function? And most people think that if one Bet Din or one Jewish court makes a ruling, that is binding for all Jews in the whole world. And I will have to say that's not the case. Today, because we lack a Sanhedrin, which is a national court in the Holy Land, what we have are various courts throughout the entire diaspora, and each one of those courts can establish what are called takanot or gezerot, reparations to the law or ordinances which protect the negative mitzvot, which are those commandments which are the don'ts. Don't do such and such thing. And as the Rambam explains in the introduction of Mishneh Torah, one court cannot force another court to accept its rulings. So, or from one country to another country, one court cannot force the other to accept the ruling. And this is basically the space in which we find ourselves today. So what happens is when a ruling is made by one court in one particular place, whoever has the best or the most media coverage will have the most acceptance around the world. That's one of the things that's happening today with the power of the internet. When a ruling is made in a Jerusalem court, for example, J-Post or Arush Sheva or one of the Israeli newspapers or the various Jewish newspapers around the world will cover those cases, publicize it. They'll put it on YouTube, they'll put it on Facebook, they'll put it everywhere. And people read, as they read this, wherever they live, including rabbis, they will then decide whether they want to respect that ruling or not. So that's the space in which we find ourselves today. And that's how it has been for the last 1,500 years or so. And so that's the first thing that I need to say about how this functions. What is the next part of your question?
Yeah. So with that point, now that we have that, Rabbi Chaim Kanetsky, he gave a ruling.
Right.
There was a group of rabbis that were in communication with Igbos, some traveled,
Right.
Different things happened, and they came back with their data. Mm-hmm. And people have to realize Rabbi Chaim Kanetsky, when he passed away, there was over 1 million people came to his funeral. Right. He's one of the most respected rabbis in our generation. Mm-hmm. And as Rabbi DeMota just said, the rabbinical rulings and what goes on with the state of Israel are two different things. And we're not really addressing immigration issues or any of that. That's not the point of this discussion. But he came to a ruling based off of the data that was acquired by his Rabbanim, and he gave a ruling. Now, the thing is that he brought in the idea of reacclimation, because that was really the issue. The issue isn't whether the Igbos were Jewish or not, or Israelites, whatever term you want to use. The issue is how do they reacclimate, right?
That's correct. So I now I remember exactly how I wanted to address your question. So in previous rulings, like the one of Rabbi Kamnietsky, the question was raised to him, we have these people in Nigeria called Igbos. They have this, they have that, they do this, they do that. Should we consider them Am Israel, Bnei Israel? Should we consider them as Jews? And the rabbi said, if they have all that, yes, but they should do Giyur Lehumrah. They should do Giyur Lehumrah in order to be accepted within the Jewish nation. And most people don't know what that means. They don't know what that means, a Giyur Lehumrah. A Giyur Lehumrah is a legal mechanism which was invented or emerged, I would say, after the state of Israel was founded. So after the 1950s, in order to remedy or repair the question of doubts of the various Jews who were migrating to the state of Israel. If we do the legal anthropology or the legal history of this very same question of Jewishness. If we look, I have written an article about it. In fact, between a difference between the legal system among Ashkenazim and among Sephardim. And what we see is that the Ashkenazim in the 10th century or so, from the time of Rabbi Gershom of Mentz, alav shalom, from that time in the first and the second crusades, there's a marked difference as to how the Rabbanim are treating the cases of those Jews who were estranged to the community because of Christianity. And so the question is, how do we deal with those who converted and now want to come back? Those rabbis who lived before the first crusades unanimously say they are Jews, they are our brothers. The fact that they became Christians doesn't make them non-Jewish. And if they want to come back, then they have a certain procedure to do so. Some of them say simply just reintegrate into community and renounce the Avodah Zarah. But then when we look at this very same literature among Ashkenazi rabbis after the second crusades, what we start seeing is a number of opinions, so many different opinions. And one of those opinions, which to this day, some rabbis are quoting in Israel, surprises me, from the 15th century, from the Maharam, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, Bavaria. He said that those Jews who converted to Christianity, even though it was by force, if they want to come back, they need to shave all the hair, like a baby. They need to shave all the hair, and they need to receive flogging. They need to be flogged, and they need tebilah. So you have three criteria there for return. And to this day, you will hear some rabbis who are quoting this very same Pesach Din from the 15th century from Rothenburg. And so what we see as we progress forward, this issue of anusim, of Jews who are forced, who are coerced or under duress among the Ashkenazim, in the context of the Soviet Union in Russia, we have, or in the 19th century, we have Rabbi, the Petichet Teshubah, Rabbi Moshe Eisenstadt. And what he says is something very interesting. He says that those who have been estranged to the community and want to return, those rebels, mumarim, he uses the term mumar, that want to come back, all they need is tebilah before 3. They need tebilah, ritual immersion, and they can do this tebilah on Shabbat. That's very interesting, because normally an immersion that's done for the case of Giur cannot be done on the Shabbat. But he writes in his commentary, if you look on Petichet Teshubah, the commentary Petichet Teshubah, in the Shulchan Aruch, which I have here behind me, on the laws of Gerut. So that's in Yoreh De'ah. Yoreh De'ah, I believe it's page 268, 269, the laws of conversion. And in his commentary, he says that they can do this on Shabbat because it's not a Giyur. As we progress forward into the 20th century with the state of Israel, all of these opinions become, I would use the term, amalgamated into a type of soup. And what emerges is what's called Giyur Lehumra. So Giyur Lehumra, 2 terms, Giyur, conversion, Humra, from the word strict. So we have a rule, we have a halachic principle which says, Safek midoraita lehumra. Whenever you are faced with a doubt of a Torah mitzvah, a Torah precept, we must take the strict approach or opinion. And so Giyur lehumra is exactly that. It's okay, this person says he's Jewish or Israelite, but we don't have proof. We don't have the proof. Therefore, this person should do a Giyur, and it should not be like a person who's trying to learn to be Jewish and has to study for a long time, but this person should be received immediately and just do the Giyur out of doubt. Some people call it Giyur Mesafek. Others call it Giyur lehazara, or giur of return. So all these terms are basically the same for the same exact principle. Now I've explained what goes on in the Ashkenazi, according to Ashkenazi jurisprudence. When we go to the Sephardic jurisprudence on the same exact matter, beginning with the Rambam in the 13th, 14th century, in his Igeret Hashemat, and in the Mishneh Torah, Ilchot Mamerim, chapter 3, Halacha 3, he states those Jews, those Israelites who have been under duress, were forced to convert to Islam, they are Jews. And if they want to come back, they can come back. There's no ritual process. With the exception if they were not able to, the men were not able to undergo Berit Milah, the circumcision, then they have to do that. But there's no notion of Tebilah at all. And also, he addresses the issue of the Karaites in the Mishneh Torah. That is the context of this law. And he says that they are like Tinok Shenishba. They are like children who have been sequestered by the nations and have been indoctrinated in their practices and their customs. And then he says, if they come back, if they approach the Jewish community and they know that they are Jews, they shall be received. They are like anusim, he says. They are like ke'anus. They are under duress. And that's a very interesting legal term, because in the law it says, Kol anus rahmana patre. Any Jew who is under duress, the merciful one exempts him. So that means that all of those judgments that the law requires to apply to a Jew or an Israelite that violates the laws like Shabbat, Kasherut, and many other things, that person, because of that situation of duress, is exempt. And of course, there are three exceptions to that. We learn idolatry, murder, and sexual morality. So the Rambam finishes saying, and we should not rush, speaking to the judges, we should not rush to go and seek their death. In other words, we should give life and instruct them and bring them to the wings of the Shekhinah. This ruling of the Rambam became the basis for all of the Sephardic Chachamim unto this day. And what we see is a continuity of how rabbis, after the expulsion of Spain, whether they are in the lands of the Ottoman Empire or North Africa, or whether they are in Western Europe, like in Italy or Amsterdam, they are all ruling in the same exact way. There are some nuances here or there, but they're all basing the Jewish identity of those Jews who are under duress on the notion of Hazakah. So the notion of Hazakah, that legal premise or that legal principle is the way that all Jews can be considered Jews today. I remember one of my colleagues, Chacham Jacob de Oliveira, we had a long talk in 2008 before I moved to the Dominican Republic. And he said to me, Yehonatan, all Jews today are Jews by Hazakah. And it didn't dawn on me at that time exactly what he was saying until I started to travel around the world and started to deal with various cases and started to see that he had a very strong point. What that means is that there are practically no Jews today that can trace a lineage going all the way back to Mount Sinai or even to Ezra. So what that means is that Jews, or those who claim to be Jews today, are Jews because of the notion of legal presumption, which in Hebrew is Hazakah. And there are various ways that Hazakot, in the plural, are established. There's the law of majority. There's a law of a portion that is extracted from another one. There are many principles. I made podcasts about this, 10 different podcasts on how to establish different types of Hazakah. And just to put it to you, to bring it close to us, many Jews today descend from Holocaust survivors. And those Jews who perished, those that survived and were able to escape to the lands of North and South America. When they arrived to the new places, they came with no documents, no witnesses. They came with nothing, just with the clothes they have on their backs and their shoes. And in some cases, they even changed their surnames to be able to hide the Jewish identity. They changed the names. And so the question is, how can this person and their grandchildren, their children and grandchildren, how can they claim to be Jews within a new context, having no witnesses, having no documents, having nothing? And the answer is very simple, hazakah. So what do the rabbis do in those cases? They would, when that person approaches the local rabbi, the rabbi would say, tell me, what's your name? Oh, my name is so-and-so. Oh, I'm from this, well, my parents and grandparents were from such and such place. They were part of this community. And if the rabbi then wants to investigate more, the rabbi would then ask and say, tell me, what did you see your mother and grandmother do on Fridays before sunset? And we all know the practice is to hadlakat ner shel Shabbat. And so all of these, what we call modus operandi, the way of acting, are the hazakah for the individual to prove his or her Jewishness before a court. So in the Talmuds, in Tractate Chulin, chapter Akol Shohatin, which is the first chapter, we have a principle. We see it clearly in the laws of Shahita. It says if you see an Israelite performing Shahita, we don't doubt that that person knows what he or she is doing. We give them the legal presumption that they are experts. So we do not bring the doubts first. This principle, this legal principle of hazakah, of legal presumption that's given to a shochet, the Sephardic Chachamim utilize this principle in determining Jewish identity of those Jews who have been estranged for centuries from the mainstream Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire, or even in Western Europe. We'll see it in various responsa of the Chachamim of Salonika, of the responsa Peri Etz Chaim in Amsterdam, and the responsa in Italy by the Chachamim like from Padua, like Leon de Modena and others. They are utilizing these legal principles to establish the Jewish identity or Israelite identity of those who have been cut off for a long time. And they are still Jews if they have that legal presumption. And so this legal presumption can be utilized today for various, not only for individuals who have been, because in the case of one individual, the individual comes from a majority. If we can establish that one person came from a particular condition which expresses or which represents the majority in another place, and we can prove that connection, then we can also establish the hazakah of this person based on this hazakah. In the same way, the Chachamim use the language of the flour. You take a piece of the flour from, like when we take out the challah or the terumah, you take that little portion away from the big batch. This same exact imagery is utilized to establish this halachic principle of farish min ruba farish, a portion that is extracted from a heterogeneous portion is representative of that majority. I know I'm saying a lot here, but it's very important for people to understand how this functions, because a lot of people don't know how or why they are Jews. A lot of people think if you have a piece of paper, that is your Jewishness. But if that piece of paper gets burnt or destroyed, you don't have those witnesses. So how do you prove Jewishness? How do you do it? All you have is the way you live, what you do, your actions, your testimony. And if you have people who know of you as living as a Jew, you have witnesses. But if those witnesses also perish, then you have no documentation, and you have and you're in a place where you're not able to tap into your hazakah, your community of witnesses, then you are cut off. So how do you reintegrate? And this is my expertise in the law.
So yeah, this is like extremely important, extremely educational, because like you're saying, today, especially, with the state of Israel growing, Baruch Hashem, and the Jewish community and social technology, all these different factors that are here, there's people that are emerging all over the world. There's people throughout Africa, people in India, people in certain European countries, different places around the world that say, the Middle East, hey, we have Jewish lineage, we have these backgrounds. So what you're giving us is an outlook, to kind of like, when we hear these claims, to not necessarily reject them,
Right. I would say something else too. I spoke first about the Ashkenazi legal system, and there's no continuation. There are many differences, but I will mention one rabbi Ashkenazi rabbi that's very close to us, that many will probably know the name. The Hazon Ish was Rabbi Karavitz. The Hazon Ish wrote in one of his responsum about Kohanim, and the question was, how do we know today that those who claim to be Kohanim are actually Kohanim and that they are Kesherim? And what he says there is astounding. And I used his halakha, his ruling for the ruling on the Igbos. And that's how I ended. I call out the knockout punch, and I'm going to tell you why. Because what he says there is, no Kohen, no one today claiming to be a Kohen, can trace his lineage all the way back to Ezra HaKohen. But we presume that person and that family are actual Kohanim because of their performance. And we do not raise the doubt that perhaps they married a woman that were not supposed to. We know from the Torah, Perashat Emor, that a Kohen who marries a Zona, Gerusha, Halala, the children are not apt to be Kohanim. They're considered Halalim, Kohanim Halalim. And so the Hazon Ish says, we don't presume for the negative. We presume for the positive. Why? Because there's Hazakah. And how is a Hazakah established? For Kohanim, there are two types of Hazakah. There's a Kohen who has Hazakah of genealogy, and there's a Kohen who has Hazakah of performance in the community. So we have a Kohen who blesses the congregation on all the services and reads the Torah first and says and gives and receives the honor to say Birkat Hamazon. This is a Kohen who has the Hazakah of synagogue performance. And then you have a Kohen by genealogy. This type of Kohen is one, according to the Halakha, is a Kohen who has witnesses for 3 generations, father and grandfather, who served in the Bet HaMikdash. You know what that means? Today, we have no Kohanim with this kind of Hazakah because we haven't had the Bet HaMikdash for almost 2,000 years. So all Kohanim today are only Kohanim based on the second level of Hazakah, which is at the synagogue level. And it should be of no surprise to us that when in 2008, Dr. Doron Behar performed a genetic test on Kohanim at the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, only about 60% had descended from the same father. The other 40% had different paternal lineages. What that means is that there are various lineages of Kohanim, or people claiming to be Kohanim, who do not descend from the same ancestor or the same paternal ancestor, which we presume to be Aharon or Ezra. So for you to see how Hazakah functions, what are the limitations to Hazakah? Hazakah is not a way to prove 100%. Law, the Jewish law doesn't work that way. Jewish law works with legal presumption. That's what I can say about that. So, in other words, if and that's why the Rambam says in the Mishneh Torah, if you see, he says, and this is based on Tractate Kiddushin, chapter 4, where it says, Kol mishpahot כל משפחות ישראל יש להם כשרות להתחתן זה בזה. All Israelite families are fit to marry one with the other. They have the legal presumption to marry one with the other. However, if you see one family or specific family speaking Lashon Hara or creating problems in the community, then we put that family in doubt and we must investigate them. So the law works. The law doesn't assume that you have to prove who you are. It gives you the legal presumption that you are who you say you are until proven guilty. Does that sound familiar? In American law, you are innocent until proven guilty. That's how Jewish law works. In other places, no. They say, no, you need to prove that you are first. So Jewish law doesn't work that way. If it worked that way, the whole Jewish nation would be in trouble today because we don't have genealogies going all the way back to the period of the covenant. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, and it's tough, for some people to really take in that thing because, like when the person's in a community and they see like a person convert to Judaism, generally they see like a very like stark approach where the convert has to do this, has to do that, this. So then at the end, the convert converts and they have their certificate, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think that experience maybe reinforces to people in their community about their Jewish authenticity. Because if this person, go ahead, Rob.
Yes, you're right. You're bringing up a very good point. But you know what happens in a lot of cases? If that Jew with that certificate goes to another community where they don't recognize that Bet Din, they'll say, no, we don't accept you. So there, the hazakah that person has in one place doesn't apply in another. And these are issues that are happening every day that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
So when it comes to the Igbo Jews specifically, right? Mm-hmm. What were your conclusions and what was your methodology to get to your conclusion?
All right, conclusions and methodology. So I explained earlier, for those who came late, we have to do the anthropology and history first. Jewish law requires us to do investigations first before interpreting the law and then finally applying the law. So in anthropology, we have a methodology, which is ethnography and ethnology, and perhaps even sociology. These are three methods that anyone who studies anthropology will learn. You immerse yourself in the culture, you study it, you observe it, and you take notes and you write about it, what you observed, and you include yourself in it. That's ethnography. Then the ethnology then is the interpretation of what those things mean, the meaning of those things you observed and also participated in. When you do the ethnology, that's where the halakha comes in. You bring all the laws which can apply to the anthropology that you did. And then finally comes the conclusion. The interpretation of the anthropology and the law in the language of the rabbis, because teshubotes, the responsum, are written in rabbinic language for rabbis, not for the lay people. So in the case when it comes to the Igbos, after 8 years of studying, of looking at the anthropology, first I must say that various books that have been written, many books on anthropology of Igbos, history books as well. You can look in the books of Remy Ilona, you can look at the books of Basden, the books of Daniel Lees. You can look at books of Jean Vicente, who's an Haitian anthropologist. You can look at the works of the book called The Forgotten Diaspora, The Making of the Jewish Atlantic. This very important book, published in 2014 by Jose Horta da Silva and Mark Peter. There are many, there's a lot of scholarship written about the Igbos. What was not done until Obadiah Alliance was interpreting all of that, doing the ethnology, and then the halakha, and putting it together and saying, hey, this is what we have. That's what has not been done. And that's what we did. Now, with that said, why a lot of people ask me, why did I go to Nigeria? Did I go to Nigeria to confirm what the ruling that was established a year ago? And I would say no. I didn't go to confirm that. I went to go see the condition of my brothers, because I'm not the first, nor will I be the last to acknowledge that the Igbos are brothers of the Jewish people. In the 17th century, the two chief rabbis of London, Raphael Mendola and also Shalomon Tzvi Hirsch, addressed letters to the Igbos saying, and they begin their letters saying, Ahenu Bnei Israel, our brothers, children of Israel. And so from that time period, we see already how Jews are interacting, or rabbis, I would say, interacting with the Igbos and addressing them as brothers. This should not surprise us, but many people don't know. So I went to Nigeria to see what our brothers are doing, how they are living, what is their condition, what are their needs, what type of what do they have, what do they lack. These were the questions I had. And one of the things I did, I spent a month there, and pretty much every day, I interviewed elders, Igbo elders, and I wanted to acquire what in Igbo language is omenana or omenala, what you do in the land. I wanted to record interviews of elders, Igbo elders, not for my sake, not for their sake, but for the sake of people like you who are listening today, to listen to their oral traditions of their practices, and for the people to bring it into the language of the laity, because most people are not going to be knowledgeable enough to read a teshubah in Hebrew, in rabbinic Hebrew. It's quite complex to follow the legal reasoning. But listening to a podcast in English, well, Nigerian English at that, will be much easier, more accessible to people listening. And so that's what I did. I went to 4 cities. I started in Abuja, then Lagos, and then Owerri. And I visited various congregations of Igbos who have been Judaized. And I'll explain what that means. In Igbo history, the Igbo tradition is an entirely oral tradition. Meaning that they didn't transmit their Torah by way of writing in a book like Jews did. They transmitted it orally. And one of the things that really amazed me was to what extent the oral tradition was transmitted and kept among Igbo. And I will say this, one of the things that most surprised me was to see Igbos practicing, no matter if they are practicing Judaism or connected to Judaism or not, they will circumcise all the boys on the 8th day. They will marry among themselves. They don't marry outside. And they have to perform marriage according to their marriage ritual, which parallels with Jewish Israelite marriage rituals. And they practice some things that we read in the Torah every year in Bereshit and Shemot, but we don't practice in our Jewish communities to this day. And that's because of diaspora. Every time the Jewish people have suffered some type of persecution or political turmoil, they have had to move from one country to the next. And every time we move from one place to the next, we lose a bit of our soul. We lose a little bit more of our tradition. But the Igbos have been for millennia, if not many centuries, in one particular region peacefully. They were able to preserve their oral tradition without problems until about 150 years ago. That's when the Christianity came in to this country, to this region of Igbo land. And that's where That's what's going on here, is forced conversions to Christianity. The Anglican Church, the British came in and brought the Anglican Church and told the parents, we will educate your children for free. Yeah, they educated them in the church and in Christianity. They learned to read and write, but they estranged them from the Torah. And so what happened was, as that second generation of children, they were estranged from the oral traditions of the Igbos and created a problem within the family, such that the children were raised thinking that everything they learn or do in the land in the form of omenana or omenala is considered, or is rather, to be paganism. So now, as Christians, with this theology, they want to go as far away as possible from those traditions. And that's the context of the responsum that the Obadiah Alliance ruled on. Not to say that they are Jews or not Jews, but to say those who have been estranged, how are they to come back? And there's something that's very different on this ruling from many other rulings. The ruling doesn't say that a Jewish court should receive or should determine that the Jewish court should determine whether Igbos are Jews or not, or apt to return into a community. And rather, they should go to the Igbo communities and perform the Kolonan ceremony, because they have their own procedure to return and receive those who have been estranged from Omenala. They have their own procedure. And I don't believe that the Jewish community, first of all, most rabbis don't know anything about Igbos. So that renders them, that disqualifies them from even making any type of ruling. The Igbos know themselves, their chiefs, tribal leaders, they know exactly who is who. I remember when I went to the first community in Abuja, people were looking at me funny because they said, "You look like us, kind of, but are you Igbo? Are you from us? Who are you? Where are you from?" In one of the communities I visited in Lagos, one of the gentlemen said to me, "Rabbi, we have heard everything you have said to us, but you know who we are, but who are you?" I had to give him my genealogy. And after I gave him 6 generations on both sides of my my tree, he was satisfied. He was satisfied. And so I'm just telling you how they function. So most Jews will not be able to pass that test within this community, because the Igbos are connected to the land. They are connected to their ancestral land. Wherever Igbos pass away, they must be buried in the land of their ancestor. So they know who they are. They can trace many generations back, because they have lands which are passed down from generation to generation within that same family, in the same way we see in the Torah, the law of inheritance, Nahala. And Jewish communities don't practice this today, but they practice that still to this day, because they are in their land. They have their land. And Jews have been displaced from country to country, land to land for many generations. And these types of practices that have to do with the land have become theoretical for us to this day. But for them, it's something they live on a daily basis. On a daily basis.
So from an anthropological standpoint, what was one of the most shocking or inspiring parts of your trip over to Nigeria?
Oof, there's a long list. And I started to write down some of my thoughts, because if not, we're not finished. I will never end this interview. There are a lot of things. I want to share with everyone that I kind of posted, I made a funny post on my Facebook account after my first Shabbat experience in Abuja. And I said to my fellow Jews, if you have not worshipped with Igbos before, you have not been worshiping properly. That's what I said. And people were like, what? What are you talking about? What is this? What's going on? And what I want to say with that is that I cried with tears of joy at this synagogue, the first synagogue I went to. When I stepped in and I sat down, grabbed my talet and my beracha, and grabbed my sidur, and then the prayers, everything was in Hebrew. So that was my first shock. I said, wow, everything is in Hebrew here. Okay, that's nice. And perfect pronunciation, very clear and crisp pronunciation. And then the whole service, I was called up to read the Torah, the first reading in the place of Kohen, because they didn't have a Kohen. And then after the Torah service, then as they return the Torah to the ark, most congregations are singing and chanting Mizmor LeDavid, Psalm 29. They have a special melody in Igbo language that they sing. And I never in my life, I had never experienced something so powerful and meaningful within a Jewish space ever. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm 42 years old. I've been to a lot of Jewish communities around the world. And I've never, ever experienced such atmosphere in any Jewish congregation in the world. That was my introduction into Igbo Jewish practice. Then when I went to Lagos, similar experience, joy, hospitality, and the Alenu. If you haven't experienced Alenu, which is the last prayer, the last declaration of the prayer service, with the Igbos, you have not been praying it properly. They know how to do it. And wow. It's from the beginning to the end, it is joyful. It's filled with kavanah. And we know what that is. The halakha says we must pray with intent. It cannot be done in a mechanic way. Many times I will go into a synagogue and people are just mumbling the lips, just trying to get through the book, get through the prayers, and then they're done and just leave. Sometimes they're mumbling and not even looking into what they're saying. It's done by rote. But the Igbo congregations, you won't see that. Everybody is involved. There's call response going on. There's call response going on the entire time. And just beautiful melodies between Hebrew, English, and Igbo language. Something that I experienced in Owerri when I went to Igbo land was something that I had never experienced in any Jewish congregation either. Many Jews don't know what bakashot are. Bakashot, if you open like an old Sephardic prayer book, bakashot are those supplicatory prayers or songs like hymns, which are said before the morning prayers. So it's a way of you entering into a mode of meditative modes and opening your heart to then begin the actual study, the korbanot and the pezukei zimra, and then the amidah. In Owerri, they begin every morning their prayers with 40 minutes to an hour of bakashot, of just praising and singing in English, in Hebrew, and Igbo language. And on the days that are not Shabbat and Yom Tov, they use traditional instruments, percussive instruments, to enhance the service. And I was able to experience that with them on Rosh Chodesh Ab, which was just a few weeks ago. And it was awesome. It was an awesome experience. And I just kept thinking to myself, why can't all Jews experience something like this? And I'm sure once you experience that, you can't go back. You can't go back to what you've been doing before. There's no way. That's why I like what you said, Rabbi. It's a life-changing experience. It has been a life-changing experience for me. Definitely. For sure. The food is very hot and spicy, but it's fresh and tasty. The weather is very hot There's sunshine every day. Some rain here or there in the summer, in the July, but it's very hot. They're very close to the equator, and that's actually a benefit for prayers, because like here in Europe where I live, Shabbat can end at 11 p.m. at night, but in somewhere close to the equator, it's the same the whole year, between 6 and 7 p.m. the whole year. And that's more in line with what the halakha establishes for prayer. You know, when you have these long solar hours, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Let's see what else. Yeah, it spoke about how hospitable they are, and the singing and the music, and I had many tears of joy, many tears of joy.
Yeah. So I mean, this is like we all a part of the journey now that you've established in these things. Now, in terms of like tefillah prayers, these types of things, were these things that just organically happen over time?
Good question. So it's different in all the congregations I visited. Most have learned. They have learned either online with what we have through YouTube or other pages that record the liturgy. They have taught themselves. They have acquired books by rabbis who have visited either from Israel, Cameroon, or from the United States. Whatever literature they have in their hands has come to them from the outside. And they have learned, they have been guided either in Ashkenazi tradition, some of them in Sephardic tradition, I would say more Yerushalmi, some even Moroccan, which makes more sense because genetically speaking, a lot of Igbos descend from, have connections with Moroccans. And that's why this red cap comes from, this red fez comes from, that was explained, it comes from there. That's why the Igbos use the red. So you will not find a uniform Igbo Jewish prayer or liturgy. That doesn't exist. And that's something that perhaps we can help them to create, but it has to stay indigenous. It cannot be a colonial invasion, like either creating something Ashkenazi or Sephardi for Igbos. They have to be able to create, and I think they're on the right track. They're on the right track. They just need some guidance. And what's going to happen, let me tell you, is that every day, more and more Igbos are leaving Christianity and coming to the Torah. Wow. They're coming to the Torah. And so there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of space for us to help, but we cannot encroach on their traditions. For me, it felt like I went there to observe, and in sometimes I was teaching, and other times I was learning. So it was an interesting experience for me, because as I learned Omenala, and I'm teaching Sephardic minhagim and tradition, and legal tradition, everybody's learning and teaching at the same time. It was awesome. It was an awesome experience.
So maybe you could go more into it. I mean, I've had conversations with Remy Alone and other people. Can we learn more about? Hopefully, I'm thinking about Amunana, because it sounds like Amuna.
Sounds like Amuna. Yeah. Omenala means what you do in the land. There are different dialects of the language. Some people say Omenana, others say Omena Allah. So Allah means the land. So what you do in the land. And the reason why the land is so important is because, as we read in the Torah, we just read it last week in Parashah Ekeb. I give you these mishpatim. I'm giving you these civil laws which you shall do in the land. So the name we call Judaism in Hebrew, we call it Mesorah, the transmission. They call it Omenala or Omenana, which means what you do in the land. And you cannot separate Igbos from that land. You cannot separate Igbos from the land, because everything that they do depends on that land. There are two There are two, or there's a concept in Igbo culture called aru. And aru refers to, in Hebrew, what we call to'eba, which are abominations. Any type of aru that is committed in Igbo land impurifies the land. We've seen that in the Torah. The Torah says if you don't keep these mitzvot, the land will spit you out. It will vomit you out. They have the same exact concept in Omenana. And that's why when certain things happen within Igbo land, they have to go through a ritual purification with their priestly clan, the Enri clan, to perform certain rituals. And if people don't want to do teshuvah and continue in their wayward path, then they will be considered outcasts. No one will marry those people. And everybody knows who the outcasts because they're labeled as osu, which are outcasts. No one will marry those lineages. That's something very important that I will mention later as we get into the question about slavery and slave trade. Because yes, we have the Igbos and their traditions, but in their communities, they know who are the outcasts, and they don't marry those families. In the same way, in Jewish law, we don't marry the mamzerim. We don't marry those lineages. So they have the same exact concepts.
Well, and so no, I know that the law of the land, the Munana, saying it in my dialect, would that be like considered like a nusak? Was it a hashkafa? Is it like I know it's the law, but like how would we categorize it to understand? And is it something that
everything? It encompasses everything. It encompasses what we will call halacha, hashkafa, minhagim, everything, all of that.
And is that a byproduct of? It's two ideas with it. One, you talked about the Judification,
yes,
right? Of the Igbo. So I want to touch on that. But Munana, this idea is this kind of like their Shulchan Aruch, their Masur that came from Israel directly? Like
yes, I will call it is their Mishnah.
Okay, their Mishnah. Okay,
is their Mishnah. Is their Mishnah, and also I would say is their Talmud, because the Talmud has halacha and it has Haggadah and also Midrash. So in this case with them, because it's not a written tradition, they don't have Midrashim, but they have Aggadot. They have many stories, and those stories teach the wisdom, the morality, in the same way that Haggadah does in the Talmud for the Jewish tradition. And then you have all the Mishnayot, all the laws. All these laws in the Omenana is transmitted orally because they are living it on a daily basis, what they do in the land. It's alive for them. It's not written. It's something they do daily from the moment they wake up until they go to sleep.
One of the things about the Beta Israel in the east of Africa, when they went out there, the idea was to say that, okay, well, they had their system was revolved around kind of like wise men, like they called them quiches or something like this. The wise men of they were the Kes, they were the ones who were the Rabbi Kish is there, so I just saw his name. But the transmission of that wisdom came through those elders. Is that the same structure that you see in Nigeria?
Yes, and I saw something that I loved very much when I went to the first congregation I visited in Abuja. After the entire Torah service in the Jewish way, as the way all Jews are doing it every Shabbat, then they go to another room in the synagogue building. They go to another room, and all the elders are sitting at the table, and the youth are across from them. And then they do Omenana. They transmit all the oral teachings, what they have received from their elders. They transmit then to the next generation in a session that can last hours of transmission. So they are doing this every Shabbat. First, the Jewish rituals, and then Omenana. So that way they are preserving this way of transmitting from one generation to the next. I thought that was beautiful, because in many Jewish congregations, you don't see this type of transmission. Maybe within the Syrian Jewish community, there's this type of transmission speaking about the old country, which is Syria. Some people will speak in Arabic, and the elders are speaking in Arabic and talking about stories and lore coming from Syria and how it came into the local community, whether it's in Mexico, Argentina, or New York. You will see that in that kind of community. But many Jewish communities don't have that anymore. People are transmitting from books, not from their own experience or from what they heard from their grandparents. It's very different. And I thought that was, for me, that's one of the most powerful things that Igbo Jews are doing to this day. So in other words, even though they are assuming Jewish practices that all Jews are doing around the world, they're not forgetting who they are as Igbos. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. And it's needed, and some people criticize the Ethiopian expansion here in Israel and say that, because they left a lot of their traditions and assumed, say, Ashkenaz or Sephardic ways, that next generation that came after them just kind of left a lot of the religion and assimilated into just mainstream secular Israeli culture.
That's correct. And that's something that Igbo Jews, we can learn from Igbo Jews. They are living this experience every day. Igbos every morning they will partake of the Kolonat ceremony. That is one of the most important rituals that are practiced on a daily basis.
So what are the issues? I'm just keep bouncing back with Beta Israel being very accepted Jewish community in Africa. One of the issues over there was the process of marriage, right? In that dynamic. So like most of what we understand through marriage, we get out of the Masechet Kedushin and the first parak, these things, Kesef Starbia, and then we have Gittin, which is another Masechet that deals with the different variations around divorce. So them not necessarily having those Mishnayot per se, they do now, but just historically they had their own, Amunana in various ways. The question is how do they deal with those particular issues? Because in Ethiopia, it's kind of a balagan in certain areas.
Okay. So among the Igbo, it's very organized and it's very globalized or universalized. In all of the communities I visited, I asked those questions and everyone gave me the same exact answers. So I was, and I recorded this in the podcast that I uploaded on my SoundCloud, and I shared it on my Facebook pages for everyone to listen to them on a daily basis as I recorded them. Marriage takes place with four stages. So when someone's going to get married, they have to, meet the parents, the families meet. There's an exchange of like a bride price. So this is in Jewish law, it's called kinyan. You can have a marriage without kinyan because of the language of the Torah. So they have kinyan in this sense. What they don't have is a written ketubah. But we know in Jewish law, the ketubah was instituted by Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach during the Greek period. So that's much later. So what they have in Omenana is something that's before this. So that's one of the indications for me that this community broke off from the rest of Israelites before that time period because of the way they do things. In terms of divorce, there's virtually no divorce among Igbos. But when there are divorces, it's a communal thing. They have to come before the elders, before the families, and they try to convince them not to. And in some cases, some people are going to laugh. In some cases, a man will take another wife. And if when he takes a second wife, the first wife will stop acting up. So there were a lot of stories about that. There were a lot of stories about that among the men. They were laughing a lot about it.
Wait.
I have it recorded as well on one of the podcasts. So
when part of the ways to fix marital issues was through polygamy, in essence.
Yes. Because
Wow.
because then, according to what I was explaining, was that the first wife, if she was acting up, then she now enters into competition. So now she has to behave if she wants to keep that husband. So she has to behave, and that's something that they practice in their communities. So
it works for them. It works
for them. That's the culture.
The culture. And okay, so just to move the conversation into like, so I brought Remy's name up before.
Yes.
He's written a lot of books about it. He's an expert on this area. God willing, we'll be able to have a conversation with him as well about this.
All right.
This humongous happening. Now, one of the things is that there's many historians that talk about. There's a famous African king. It's named Muhammad Bello. Have you heard about?
Yes.
And he writes in his memoirs that the Africans, he says, he's like defending the Africans, or he says, us Africans, we're not savages. We didn't sell our brothers into slavery. Rather, we sold the Canaanites. He referred to them as Canaanites, who've been living in our land for over a millennium. So that, as a point, many discussions around this topic, one of the most biggest and you say juiciest concepts is this idea that many Igbos were sold in the transatlantic slave trade. Now, some historians say that there's 1.7 out of 1.7, there was 1.2, 1.3, some say less. There's different, because she says she told around the whole conversation. What did you get from the ground from the people there?
Good question. So I spoke to some people who are descended from what they call Aru, the Aru men. And they explained to me that most of those slaves who were sold were from the Aru people, which is a group among the Igbos. The second thing they said to me was that in the first generation, they were trading, just doing different types of trade with the Europeans, and then they were duped. They were taken as slaves by the Europeans, and then this system was developed where the Aru were the ones doing the slave trading with the Europeans, the Aru, among the Igbos. And so the reason why there's a lot of controversy around this is because everyone speaks about the Aru being responsible for the slave trades. But if you are from that group, you don't want to acknowledge the fault of your ancestors. So that's why there's this debate. Some are saying yes, and others are saying, no, it's not that, it's not this, because there's this pushback. It's the blame. No one wants to take the blame. I was just speaking today. I speak on a daily basis with Omanana defenders. We have a group for many years now, and we were talking about this very same issue today, this afternoon, before this interview, and how this one particular group of Igbo say the Aru need to ask for forgiveness for what they did by selling off so many slaves. I'm not going to get into that debate. I'm just transmitting the information that I received. Yeah.
So on that point, in North America, going off of how halakhic rulings and decisions come about, over 100+ years in America, there has been, Blacks, African Americans, Negroes, whatever term you want to use, that have said, hey, our tradition is that we're part of these lost tribes. They develop when they're able to have a religious freedoms, because there was a time where blacks were not allowed to have religious freedoms. When they were able to, that's the first thing that they went to, right? And over 100+ years, there's been Hebrew Israelites. We have a new radical expression of that today. Yes. That kind of like messes up the history, but the history has always been African Americans wanting Rabbi Matthews, Rabbi Levy, Rabbi Ford. Their goal was always to try to integrate. It was rejected a lot, but which I believe led to this radical expression that we have today. What would we say to African Americans who identify or connect to this idea of the lost tribes based off of what we know today about the Igbos being sold into North America?
Wow. I asked this very same question to the chiefs in Owerri, in Igbo land. And the answer I got was this. The answer was, they said that they know how to identify Igbos no matter how many generations or where they have gone, because of the practices they had. Mm. So I love the answer, because that's the same exact answer we get in our Mishnah, in our Gemara, which is modus operandi. What you do, what you observe someone is doing, that is the testimony of that person's Israelite status. So I was told that if someone claims to be Igbo or descendant of Igbo, we check to see what in their family, what customs do they have. If they have Igbo customs, they are Igbo. And then that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how do we reintegrate them? Or what shall we do? How do we help them? And in Owerri, in Igbo land, they told me that there have been people from Cuba and the USA who have done just that. They have come and integrated with them and have returned and have acquired their Igbo Jewish status in such a way. So they are prepared. I am now speaking for this community, and they are prepared to receive as many people as possible. Whoever wants to go and go through this experience of returning to your ancestor, to your roots, your cultural root, welcome.
Okay, and so on that point, that's very, very important information that they're welcoming us. So another question is, the people who came to North America were under the context of distress, right? And for generations, they were forbidden to practice any other type of spirituality other than, what they received on plantations in many cases. Right. A lot of it was Christianity. Right. So how would they, from a halakhic standpoint, be classified dealing with that? But it's like if someone was captured by the Romans or captured by a Spanish army and they were denied, they said, hey, if you do any of this, boom, we're going to kill you. And then two, 3 generations, it's like, hey, we know we have an oral tradition that we have this connection, but in terms of practice, we really don't, we weren't allowed to keep anything based off of distress.
Yes, this is a very difficult question to answer. And I believe it's difficult to establish a blanket statement for all cases. I believe it has to be studied case by case. Because I know some African Americans who can trace back to the colony of Virginia, and in the colony of Virginia, almost 90% of the slaves that came in there were from the Igbo. Yeah. So if someone is able to trace by genealogy to those slaves that came in, and also trace that they were marrying Igbo among Igbos, because that's another thing. Igbos don't marry outside of their culture. We see it in the Caribbean islands. In Haiti, for example, the slaves there who were from the Igbo didn't want to mix with the other African slaves. They didn't mix because they were not circumcised. That's according to historical documentation in that context. But in the context of the United States, we have to, before we can even tackle the halachic ramifications of this, I believe we need to do the anthropology and the history first. I haven't done that. I'm not an expert in that. So we learn from our teachers to say, when you don't know something, say you don't know. So I'm not an expert when it comes to what's happening in the United States. I know the Caribbean very well. I know those sources because I've studied them for my PhD and my master's, and in what's happening in Brazil as well, and in Suriname and these places. For example, there were cases where Jews, Portuguese Jews, bought slaves, and they were circumcised. They saw they were circumcised, and they wrote letters back to the rabbis in Amsterdam, and they said, "How should we treat them? They came from, the Igbos," and they said, "Free them. They are our brothers." We have those documents of the correspondences through the Sheilot Shulot, the shoot literature or the responsive literature. But this is what's happening in Brazil and in Suriname, South America, 17th, 18th century. But I haven't seen anything like that within the USA context. So we need to study everything that's available to us to reconstruct the context by region. I believe by region in the USA on the East Coast. And then from there, in each region, then start to apply the halakha. What you said about the duress, that could be a very good indicator or a principle in order to establish Jewishness of someone who descends from slavery and slave trade, because they're considered to be tinok shenishba, a child who's been sequestered by the goyim, raised in their traditions. And according to halakha, that person is still an Israelite. The question is, after so many generations and mixing with non-Israelite people, then how do we determine? Can we establish a majority, a hazakah based on the majority? Possibly, but in order to do that, we need to do the anthropology first. I haven't done that.
So that definitely needs to be something should be funding to research that. Now, when we talk about the dynamic of, say, African Americans, say, going to Igbo land,
yes,
in saying, proclaiming and saying, hey, you know what? I can't prove it on paper because we were, under stress and our history was removed and systematically removed. And it makes you wonder, like, why did they care so much to remove the history of these people, right? So the history was systematically removed from these people. So, but we've had traditions of Judaism, and the only thing we could attach ourselves to was what we had around us, which was mainstream Judaism. Do the people in Nigeria, the Igbos, do they have a reacclimation process? Have they got to that stage, or they just mostly been so enclosed into?
They are at the stage. They are at the stage, and that's why I'm reporting, and I'm telling you, welcome. Those that want to connect in such a way will be welcomed by brothers in Igbo land.
Now, would it be like a Ger Sahumra type of a thing, or would it just be like learning the Amunana and, you know what I mean? Like, how did they?
Yes, and partaking of the Kolana ceremony. First thing I would say, if that man is not circumcised, he needs to do that first, because it is considered aru. It is an abomination for Igbo not to be circumcised. So that's the first thing they will have to do. So it follows the same structure of the Torah. That's the first thing they have to do, even before you can even sit down at the table to talk about this.
There's a rabbi who I've spoken to a few times in this chat, and he put a couple of questions. I wanted to see if he wanted to. Rabbi, do you want to come up? I can see you. You want to ask your questions, or you're okay with that? Hold on. Okay. Trying to unmute you. Okay. Rabbi, you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Okay, so first I want to say Koach Kavod, both of you, and thank you for this opportunity to express and explain not only your experiences, but your knowledge, information about this great, I call this one of the last and greatest chapters in the diaspora. So Baruch Hashem for what you're doing. And you too, Rob Mordecai. Much kavod to you. I have, for both of you, have nothing but I feel starstruck right here. Okay, you two guys like my celebrity rabbis. I do have a question because the phenomenon here in the U.S. with African Americans being forced to breed and forced to, and you already addressed that. I think you said that they're waiting with open arms. And me personally, coming through the traditions and Masorah from Rabbi Matthew, but more from the halakhic aspect of it, and knowing what he envisioned. So, with that being said, a lot of people who are here in America, who have their own oral traditions, identify as Jews, may not want to join the old way with the Nigerians, although they consider them their brothers. What do you see in the future with that group of African Americans? And I already started an organization called West African Jews of the Diaspora, because we all been scattered throughout the world, and not just here in the US today, also in Brazil and other parts of South America. So what do you foresee based on your experiences, based on what you're working with? I'm right now personally working with teaching and hoping to cultivate future leaders under the situation that we are in. I am looking forward to the future. Based on what you're telling me, it looks like a beautiful thing that's happening, Be'ezra Hashem. But what do you see? And I'm looking forward to hear your thoughts, both of you, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your question and bringing this issue. I have had this conversation before, I think sometime last year, with some people who are part of some type of Hebraic movement among African Americans in the United States. And I will repeat what I told them. Form your own communities. Form your own communities. Create your own indigenous tradition, which brings Africa and also United States and maybe the Caribbean, and create your own tradition in a halachic way and express it in that way, make it your own. Because I believe you are correct. Not everyone wants to go back to the old way and connect with the Igbos. And every community, every Jewish community that we mentioned today has its own identity based on geography and experience. And even some communities like the Sephardic community that was expelled from Spain and Portugal and went to the Ottoman Empire and to other places in the New World, are always remembering Sepharad, Spain, Portugal, always through the language, the food, the music, the way we study the law. And I believe that African American Jews can do the same exact thing in the USA. Same exact thing. Connect to the old land, express it in the language of the new lands, and stay with halakha. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and we could, and I think it's about building off of Nigeria, building off of things like Amunana, building off of these mechanisms, and clarifying that Rabbi Yehuda, he actually has a Siddur. I haven't saw it yet, but it's the West African Siddur.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. So these types of tools, I think it's pertinent, because I mean the issues like this, there's people, there's millions of dollars that have been put into people going to India to research B'nai Menashe and other, tribes, and they have some chazaka and something, it's open, but it's there, and they love the Torah, and they're good people, and I met many here in Israel, right? You see a lot of B'nai Menashe all over the place. And the same thing with other communities, with Spanish communities, these types of things, in terms of so it seems like that there should be a safe space of development for African Americans who connect to the Nigerian outlook, the West African outlook, and there should be a segue system into them to, be able to keep halakhic Judaism, and
I want to
and when
add
we think
something.
go ahead, Rabbi, please.
I want to add something very important to what you're saying. What we cannot have is people coming to Torah and being disenfranchised by another group of Jews. We cannot have that. And that's why I started explaining about Hazakah, and all Jews are Jews today because of Hazakah. If one Jew starts saying to another Jew, you're not Jewish or you're doubtful, that person is bringing doubt on himself and his whole lineage, because we are all Jews based on the same exact legal principles. So what you're saying about creating a safe space is so important. You know how many people are alienated from the Torah because they approach a local synagogue and the rabbis look at them and say, who are you? No, we don't want you. They won't tell them in that way, but they will make them feel unwanted. And so that person ends up going to Islam. Ends up going to Islam or to some other denomination. In the United States, we have so many denominations of religions. And people are creating their own religions. So that's what's happening in the United States. We cannot have that. I believe now, today, we have the tools to be able to rebuild all those Jews that have been disenfranchised. That's my vision.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. Is that we're here, and it's also is prophetic. You know what I mean? We have an idea that towards the end of days that people will be gathered, people who were exiles, people who were subjugated will return. And it's not. It doesn't have to be necessarily, a criticism to the overall Jewish community, but it could be a criticism on us as Black Jews or Jews of color, that we're not establishing that, and we're not going out and we're not building those safe spaces ourselves, but rather throwing people who are culturally different in the diaspora, right? Because we're not in Eretz Israel. We're not with the Beis Hamikdash where everything is clear, right? We don't have a Sanhedrin. So when we talk about other communities taking on, it's hard for communities of Sephardic and Ashkenaz, you know what I mean, to deal with each other and these types of things. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do this. And I think the trip that you just had to Nigeria really opens up that connection between African-American spiritual healing and the expansion and understanding of the traditions that have been developed in Africa, that the Igbos really feel that this connection goes all the way back to the time of the temple, Amunna and these different things. So, authenticity, these things, it's there, right? But it's not about everyone having to agree with it. It's just more so saying that we're saying that. So I think we should have more conversations about this. I think if there's anyone else that has any specific question, we could kind of, go ahead, Rabbi.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think perhaps the video, you were not able to share it because you're doing YouTube Live.
Yeah.
If you're able to allow me to share screen, I can play it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that
okay, wait, let's try to do this again. Hold on. Yeah, okay, so the Rav made an amazing video around his trip. It's hold on, let me see if we could. Let's see if we try it one more time. Hold on, can you guys see that? Do you see anything, or is it just me?
Yes, it's there.
Okay, so let's try to do this. Hold on. Perfect timing. See, everything works out. The Shkaka Pratis. Hold on.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
There's no sound. That's the only thing. But it's fine. As long as they can see the video, we'll be fine.
Is there sound or no?
I'm here at the synagogue in Oweri, Rabbi Ephraim Uba.
Okay.
And this is his community. They have lodging here for men and women. There's a kitchen where meals are prepared. Are you able to allow me to share screen?
Yeah, I could do that. Hold on.
Yeah, because I think because you're running the YouTube live, it's
that's just cutting out the sound.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If you allow me to share it, perhaps.
So how do I make this open? Okay, hold on. Oh yeah. There we go. You see, it's open?
Yes. Let's see if I'm able to do that. Can everybody see that? Yes.
Yep. So ready to go.
See if that works. Yes.
You can hear it good?
No sound?
Yeah, it's still not the same. I think it's the live. Well, it shouldn't matter on yours. Rabbi, they couldn't hear it on that one either? Well, I mean, hey, the link's there. You know, we could put the link in the chat.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hold on. I'll put the link in the chat. Hold on. Jeez. Rabbi, could you put the link in the chat?
Yeah, let me see. 1 second.
Other people could put it in too. Probably put it in. So we'll put it in. So yeah, I think this is the beginning of many other conversations on this topic. One thing I want to talk about as well is this idea, and I think we could close off with this point, is the idea of this knowledge, right? This information being accessible to kids. So the link is in the chat, you guys, for the video. So everybody wants to see the video, please share it. It's an amazing video. The Rav should be a director, you know, the way everything was put together. So the thing is, one of the things that has been talked about a lot with different people is that there's so much lack of information about the African American experience past slavery, right? And through this knowledge that we have, we're not saying all African Americans are descendants of Igbos, but we are saying that a tremendous amount of Igbos, some people even say over 1 million, were sold into slavery, right? So I think those are two different points. One is a factual point, and another one could be assumption, right? So what is your thoughts on this information about that dynamic of the transatlantic slave trade, along with the history of the Igbo people in general and their connections being put into things like course curriculums and different mediums of education that could be shared to schools in America, like regular schools, that kids, this should be a part of social justice. This should be part of Jewish diversity. And this information, should be in every school district, every school in America.
I agree totally with you. One of the things that evil politicians would do is try to erase the history of a people. When you erase a people that doesn't know its history will not know who they are. And one of the ways to reconstruct a nation or people is by allowing them to know who they are first.
Yeah.
And that's something that James Bowen said. He used to say that a nation that doesn't know its history is bound to repeat it again. And if a nation doesn't know where it comes from, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. So I totally agree that there's, the educational system at the public school level in the United States, we have Black History Month. That's how I learned about Igbos when I was 17 years old. We were told to read Oladeuda Equiano, and that's that story, that autobiography was my first experience of Igbos. I didn't know what the ramifications were like they are today, but that was my first experience with Igbos, with that name, and knowing from that personal ethnography that they were Israelites, because he describes himself being as an Israelite, a Hebrew, circumcised on the 8th day, who kept Shabbat, and he was stolen. And he was thrown on a ship, and he was given a Portuguese name, Gustavo Vasa. I remember all these things from when I was 17 years old, from reading that in high school as part of our literature. I believe that in the history, there has to be some type of education in the USA with the history of different slaveries and ports and all these migrations of Africans, where they're coming from, and also to study those cultures. By not allowing African Americans access to that information, or even the tools to know how to acquire that information, that is a way to suppress a people. I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to get in trouble with politicians.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's what it is.
Okay, so Rabbi, I think I could speak for everybody. This has been a very impressive discussion. You gave us a clear understanding on many Jewish topics, and those Jewish topics has led us to be able to understand and have the critical analysis of what you experienced in Nigeria with the Igbo people. And I think it's a new chapter with African Americans, even though it's been discussed before and people know about it, as you said, and these different types of things. But I think we're at a different stage because of technology and our ability to do that. And I think one of the things, and we'll talk about it in private, is maybe to start virtual study groups between African Americans that are interested in to learn about Amunina.
Okay.
And to learn about that, and because I know you're working with me and the Defenders and the whole thing, so maybe we could start that that conversation, and be able to start that dialogue of understanding, because I think this is, because for African Americans, it will be probably the first experience of unadulterated spirituality that they've ever been presented with since they've been in North America. And so, I just think that could be a great first start. And I think there needs to be monies invested into anthropological research, which are based in, to be able to get that structure and to bring out the analytical data that's associated with real comprehensive rabbinical inquiry. And so I think, we have to talk about these things and find partners that also see the value in these things, and we'll see wherever God wants us to go with it. But
I talked with all the leaders and all the congregations about exactly what you're saying now, and they all agreed that they would like to participate in that.
Beautiful. Yeah. So again, I thank Rabbi Yehuda for giving us his perspective, and everyone else who asked questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer. There's so many questions. This group, there's 22 something people now, but we've had over 50 people through the course of this.
I'm going to put my email address here.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
People can ask those questions there.
Perfect. And also, Rabbi, you can let people know how they could find you on social media outside of.
I'm everywhere. If they just type my name, they're going to find me everywhere.
There you go.
You can find me everywhere. Yeah. So that's the email of the Bedin. People can address questions there, and my name is underneath. If you Google my name, you will find everything. All my academia, rabbinics, everything's there.
So we're going to end the conversation here. Again, we want to thank the Rav for this amazing dialogue, and this is going to continue on. This is a mission. This is this is part of bringing the geula. Like, this isn't a hobby. This is why God brought us in this world, and you took the Rav over there, and I'm so glad he went. Because he has such a huge umbrella of thought and information that I don't think people like myself and other people would be able to tap into, because the anthropological research and these things are foundational for halakhic discourse. And without having that understanding, it would just, be an inspirational trip and these types of things. But now we have bases to build off of. We have bases to communicate with other organizations and institutions. And what I'm doing is we're going to take the classes, it's up, live, whatever. But what we're going to do is we're going to upload it this afternoon or tonight. I'm in Israel, so it's already 10 o'clock here. So we're just going to maybe cut out the first part of it and then upload it on Facebook and then re-upload it. And then I'll share it with the Rav, and he could share it on his platforms as well. And Rabbi, did you put your email in there in the chat?
Yes, is there? It should be. Let me see where it's at. Oh, 1 second. 1 second.
Yeah.
Can everybody see that? Yes?
Yeah. No, sir. Okay, so any of the questions that we weren't able to get to, please contact the Rav directly and have that conversation. If for whatever reason you lose the email, whatever, you can reach out to me. I'll give it to you as well. But again, this is an ongoing conversation, and I personally, being African American and having ancestries, I see this as an awakening. And it's pertinent that we build a relationship with Nigeria. It's pertinent that we build a relationship and that we share resources, because there's a lot of things that we have here in the West that shared over in that part of the world could literally change lives. And the information that they have and the history that they have in that part is literally creating life, right?
Yes, and you know what? They are waiting. They are waiting for you.
Yeah.
They are waiting. They are waiting. Welcome. Waiting.
Move in. Exactly. Okay, so we're good, and we'll just keep talking. I mean, it's like this is an ongoing dialogue. This isn't like a one-off thing. So we're going to close it out here. We're going to stop recording, and everyone should continue to have an amazing week. Shabbat Tov, and again, thank you, Rabbi, just for your work and your courage. We're praying for you the whole time here in Israel, that you should be safe. And
thank you.
It's a risky trip out there. It's not.
I didn't even mention those things because
we wanted to stay away from that.
I didn't want to scare anyone off.
Yeah. You got to be brave over there.
That's right.
But hey, you got to be brave for Hashem if you want the truth. You got to be brave for that too. So it's the same thing. But anyways, we're there. Keish is here, different people, but we're going to have more conversations. But again, we just wanted to thank you. And here we'll just end the conversation, and then we'll resume our normal lives.